Hello, I am Dr. Harriet Kargbo, Coordinator and Assistant Professor at Coppin State University in the School of Education and the Department of Instructional Leadership and Professional Development. I want to thank Dr. Ron Williams and the College of Business for the invitation today. The topic for discussion is reconciling Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, making and learning in the next norm. The Du Bois-Washington debate that occurred in the 20th century was very thought-provoking and still resonates today in the minds of so many people. Both educators had different approaches to education. Washington espoused industrial education, career readiness. On the other hand, Du Bois espoused higher education, career readiness. When you look at education in the 21st century, starting with P12, educators continue to concentrate on the whole child. Curriculums center on three domains: cognitive, knowledge, psychomotor, skills, and affective attitudes. The Common Core State Standards Initiative began in 2009 during the era of former President Barack Obama, preparing students for career and college readiness, focusing on developing critical thinking, problem solving, and analytical skills. There are alternatives to public traditional high schools: vocational, technical, magnet, specialized, middle college, cyber, and charter. To earn a high school diploma today, students must have credits in all domains of learning, along with documentation for community service hours, giving back to the community. Looking at Washington's and Du Bois' paradigms of education, reconciling, merging the two educational constructs, educators and other stakeholders now see the big picture. No longer are students compelled to do traditional jobs like their parents did. They can use their skills and talents to create jobs for themselves. Their work on the higher education level is valued too, nurturing and teaching talented students. Knowledge is power. Learning is the most important skill in a world where knowledge doubles every 12 minutes and information or knowledge drives the economy and socioeconomic realities of the community. Learning, connecting with getting an education continue to be an equalizer to make students competitive in the economy. Students are encouraged to be lifelong learners. There are vast ways to help them to be inquiry learners, especially with the aid of technology. The outcomes of their knowledge yield job opportunities to help the economy. The pandemic continues to be a career changer. Teleworking and online learning on all educational levels have provided a platform for surviving, thriving, and advancing. HBCUs continue to create value in a world where learning is the primary economic currency. The domains of learning are still essential in the general education courses, which helps students to focus on next their specific majors, such as education, STEM, business, health professions, behavioral sciences, performing arts, humanities, etc. HBCUs continue to be a pathway for success for students. They enable students to learn their history and appreciate their culture, work with caring, nurturing instructors, make connections of the domains. encourage travel to local, national, and international areas to make educational connections, experience shared governance, enhance their workforce development skills, understand how the economic currency is necessary for survival in society, get involved in political decisions, be advocates for their communities, and experience being a part of an extended family in terms of alumni associations, sororities, and fraternities, and giving back and sharing their talents. Yes, Washington and Du Bois were graduates of HBCUs, Hampton and Fisk, respectively. Their contributions to HBCUs still have an impact today. Their educational constructs continue to provide educational options at HBCUs and other educational arenas. As educators prepare students for the next task ahead and prepare the next generation, they will be ready as a result of reflecting and merging the educational constructs of Washington and Du Bois. Thank you for your attention.
Greetings. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to talk with you a little bit about the Booker T. Washington and Du Bois debate. First, I want to thank the School of Business and Dr. Ron Williams for giving me this opportunity to have this discussion with you. The Booker T. Washington, W.B. Du Bois debate goes back a long ways, and it has been very pivotal in the Black community in looking at the role of economics versus education in terms of Black progress. The debate really started, the controversy started with Booker T. Washington's discussion at the Atlanta Exposition back in 1895. This was about 30 years after the end of the Civil War. And basically what Booker T did was to take what we call an accommodationist strategy. He basically said that in all things that are economic, Blacks and whites can be joined as the fists, but in all things social, they will be as separate as the fingers. And many people took this as accommodation because it exceeded to whites any challenge in terms of Black equality, Black political empowerment, and even Black higher education. Washington believed firmly, having come out of slavery and having gone to Hampton Institute, which was an industrial school, he believed that the path forward for Blacks would be to develop skills, to develop marketable skills, and therefore show themselves useful to whites. That whites would find them valuable in terms of economic future, and that the issues in terms of political empowerment, higher education, Black equality, those things should be placed on the back burner. This lasted for about 8 years until, again, there was some discussions with that, but Washington became the major figure in the Black community, the major spokesman for the Black community. And of course, he had all kinds of praise and rewards from the larger community, the Northern industrialists, particularly because they wanted to train a Black working force. And of course, the Southerners appreciated the fact that he accepted an inferior position for Blacks relative to whites in the South. In 1905, W.B. Du Bois published his Souls of Black, 1903, W.B. Du Bois published his Souls of Black Folk, and in it he had a major essay on Of Mr. Booker T. Washington and Others. And he led the discussion in terms of challenging Washington's notion that industrial education would be the major thing for Blacks. Now, the critical part of Du Bois's pushback was not so much about industrial education as it was to accepting the presumed inferiority of Blacks. Du Bois has spent and did spend most of his career scientifically demonstrating that Black people were equal to white people, and any differences between Blacks and whites resulted from slavery and other aspects of the environment. Here's what Du Bois said: Mr. Washington represents in Negro thought the old attitude of adjustment and submission. His program practically accepts the alleged inferiority of the Negro races. And of course, you know that Du Bois had always said that in the talented 10th, that Blacks, like any other race, will be saved by its talented individuals. And in this case, he was looking at those people who were able to become highly educated. He saw education as a critical thing in determining the nature of man, not only that man should work, but man should understand the nature and the purpose of life. And he thought higher education would be a part of doing that. Booker T was always considered a wizard. At the same time, he was pushing industrial education. We know that at Tuskegee, people were learning literature and philosophy and the sciences and a variety of other things. Many suspected he took this position because Tuskegee and his work were in the Deep South. And had he taken any other kind of position, Tuskegee would have been destroyed, as in fact, many Black institutions were burned to the ground during that period. Tuskegee survived, it thrived, and of course it became a darling of white philanthropists, as did Hampton. Booker T died in November 14, 1915, and he died before seeing a couple of things that I think that were important. Number one, there was a rise of Black entrepreneurs. We saw that across the country, particularly in certain cities that became almost predominantly Black. And unfortunately, those cities came under vicious racist attacks. One was Tulsa in 1921, and another was Rosewood in 1923. Prior to that, in 1921, following World War I, there were all kinds of white riots against Black people seeking to get industrial jobs, seeking to get factory jobs. During those days, factory jobs were, for the most part, reserved for whites. And when Blacks were brought in, because they had the skills and other things to do those jobs, the whites rioted, and it resulted in a lot of Black people being killed as a result of that. Du Bois concluded from that economic power alone was not sufficient, that Blacks, in fact, needed to have the political power to protect the economic gains, which I think was his fundamental point. This point he made along with other points in 1930 as a part of a commencement address at Howard University. And he took on in this essay, which is available, called Education and Work, he talked about the challenges of industrial education versus what he called liberal arts education. And he admitted that a lot of the controversy had kind of spun out of control, that it got focused on things that may not have been as important. But the fundamental difference and the fundamental issue was, of course, Black empowerment and Black progress. He pointed out that the industrial education that Washington had supported during those days, one was rapidly becoming obsolete. As you know, Washington talked about basic skills like carpentry and bricklaying and plastering, sewing and home economics. And most of those things by the 1930s were being replaced by technology. Not as many homes were being made of bricks. A lot of carpentry work was being done in factories by machines in terms of creating structures that were put together as opposed to houses being built from the ground. He also lamented the fact that Washington did not actively involve labor, the discussion of labor and labor unions, and the role that labor played in determining what work people would do and how they would work. Washington seemed to think that people could become individual entrepreneurs, they would be successful, and of course, whites would appreciate them. What he didn't realize is what we saw in Tulsa and Rosewood was the resentment on the part of whites. The fact that they saw Blacks doing well economically, and they in fact burned these cities to the ground. The cities were known for Black economic empowerment. They were considered, the Tulsa, I think, was a little Black Wall Street in terms of the number of Black businesses there and the people who thrived in those areas. At the same time, Du Bois also pointed out that a college-educated Negro, at that point, focusing on liberal arts, that had also fallen short. That we had a lot of people who were being educated for professions that were not available. There were a few in teaching, a few in lawyers and doctors, but for the most part, there weren't a lot of opportunities available. And a lot of people were being educated, but did not have a mechanism for economically supporting themselves. He concluded in that discussion that there was a need for both, that Blacks needed to work on economic empowerment, that is finding ways to earn a living, finding ways to be economically useful, but they also need to work on political empowerment, that the two are not mutually distinct, and therefore they should go hand in hand. We see the same thing today as we realize that a lot of white economic development has been buttressed by political activities, political laws and regulations that support that, and Blacks need to take advantage of that. Likewise, Blacks need to be able to protect economic gains by participating in the economic system. Bottom line is that the notion that Washington embraced, that somehow Black people can prove themselves to be economically viable and not address directly segregation, racism, white supremacy, and those issues, that notion is long gone. Washington perhaps needed to do that in 1905 or immediately after the Civil War, but today that's no longer the case. Black entrepreneurs and Black business people, Black people who want to move forward, must be concerned that the entire race moves forward politically, socially, as well as economically. And with that, I'll pause and entertain any questions you might have. Thank you again for the opportunity.